So we are live. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
We have a special guest today. So Christy couldn't make it, so we have my cousin Sarah here. She and I have loved The Count together, and I think Janelle's still loving The Count. If I'm assuming right.
Oh yeah, especially after this section. This section was like, oh, so much. I loved it so much.
It was a really good section. I loved going through it slowly and tabbing everything. But I think I ran out of tabs of several things while camping. So I was like, I have to be careful now and carefully picky.
Yeah, she was struggling with the tabs.
We were camping together, so she understood my struggle. So this was a big action section, I think. Like, It's like the climax is building.
Oh, yeah. So much happened in this section. Definitely rising action, definitely. And the climax is coming soon. And I'm so curious because after this section now, I don't know what that climax is going to be. I'm so excited.
Yeah, because like the situation with Mercedes and Albert, that almost feels like it could be the climax of the story. But nope, there's still a whole bunch more to go, apparently.
Well, because there's 200 pages left, which is why I thought that can't be the climax yet. There's still 200 pages.
Yeah, it's definitely intriguing to see also where everyone is at, like in their own little stories, because I like seeing how like the people who are maybe we should call, I don't know, the villains as well as the Count, because I think he's definitely being a villain in this next part.
Oh yeah.
Or the part that we're talking about. So he's definitely a villain, but the other ones that are villains, they're all getting their just desserts. But then also the second generation, they're trying to they're almost trying to get out of that.
Yeah.
Which I found very interesting too. So I love seeing the complex relationship between them and then their parents, but then also all of their friends, because Francis is in there too. So
yeah,
he does not deserve anything that happens to him in this book.
The poor guy.
Yeah, it's not even intergenerational trauma. It's like intergenerational trauma adjacent. Not that the other characters deserve any of the intergenerational trauma crap, but
no.
Yeah, he's not even related to it.
What's going on?
I mean, I feel bad for him because in this section he finds out from Nortier about what happened with his father?
Yeah, who killed his father.
And so therefore he breaks off the engagement. My problem with that is I like Franz, so I felt really bad for him in that situation, but I also really like Valentina and Morale, so I was actually glad of it because I was like, okay, this opens up the possibility that just maybe Valentine will get her man, but I felt bad for Franz because I do like him.
Yeah, it was just such an interesting moment. I was the whole thing building up to that too, where Morel's like, I don't think you can do that. This is the guy that's the mute, and he's older, and he's like, no, I can. And you're like, you can just tell by his face, and you're like, all right, we'll let you handle it. And suddenly it's actually he does it perfectly.
He is one of my favorite characters in this book because it's he literally has nothing but his mind and his finances, but and he still manages to influence everything so much. And it's just great.
Yeah. Oh, he's a great character.
Yeah.
In an awful family.
Yeah.
So
it's the one person in Valentine's family who isn't horrible.
Yes. So Sarah and I are not going to spoil too much. We're going to try not to. But if anyone is watching and has anything that they'd like to discuss, please let us know, because this has a lot of goodies to discuss. Some things that I particularly loved was the first chapter of this reading, where Villefort is conducting his interrogation or his investigation. And I think Janelle's frozen, but let's keep going.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I think it was just so interesting when Villefort was like, I'm going to investigate all this. And then they ended up trying to do this cat and mouse game together.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of, and it's interesting because he did something similar earlier in the book as well, but this time it's a lot more close to home. Because there's probably a poisoner in your family. Let's find out who. And everyone thinks it's his daughter. And
there's so many things going on with Phil for this section. And I
That's
feel
my
sorry
ring
for the
light.
poor guy,
Yeah,
actually.
which is weird because he's horrible and he's been one of the main villains for the whole book. But yeah, this section you do feel kind of bad for him.
It's true. There was one thing I noted as a tag, but I will have to try and find it because it's a little bit just to show everyone, this is how many tabs I did. So I'm gonna have to try finding the tabs I wanted to talk about.
Amongst your many tabs.
I put the ones like further out that I wanted to like, or thought was really important. So I'm hoping I can find those ones. But we'll see. So yes, let's see if I can find that. Anything else that you want to talk about, Sarah, in this section in particular?
I love the whole section with Mercedes and the Count because it just throws such a huge wrench into his plans. Because up to that point, he's been more or less in control the entire book. Well, since he became the Count. And then suddenly she walks in and, oh yeah, by the way, I've known for years. Please don't kill my son. Or, hey,
and Janelle wanted to talk about Mercedes, so let's talk about that.
Sorry, my internet bumped me off. I'm so sorry. Hopefully that won't happen
again. I assume this was something along those lines. So we're just going to talk about Mercedes and how that threw the Count off of his entire
Yes,
system.
please, let's talk about Mercedes. Oh my goodness. That was phenomenal. I loved that chapter so much.
He just doesn't know how to act when someone actually knows what he's doing.
I felt like it was like a true robotic malfunction or something on the page.
Error 404 or whatever that is.
Yes. Yeah. All right. I have to get to that chapter in my book because I have tabbed. First of all, I have to say, I was totally right. So way back when the Count first encounters Mercedes and she walks into the room while he's talking, in that moment, I said, she knows just from his voice that it's Edmund. And I was totally right because she says it flat out in this chapter.
It's like, been so hard to not say things like that. Oh, Janelle froze again. Hopefully your internet doesn't kick her off again. I did find my note though, so we can talk about things when she gets back. But so the whole thing about Villefort, which is I think interesting to his character, is that the whole reason he's a villain is because he doesn't do justice when he's required to do justice at the beginning, right? Mm-hmm. Hello, Penny. I think the whole thing with Villefort is he doesn't do justice when he's required to do justice at the beginning. It's his job. And then the whole time we're just like, what's going on? So actually in chapter 81, when there's a whole thing about the poisoning going on in his family, I had to tab this because it was when the doctor's talking to him and the doctor says, come magistrate, show yourself a man. As an interpreter of the law, do honor to your profession by sacrificing your selfish interests to it. So he's like, someone else is accusing him of not being an actual just person.
Yeah. So in other words, it's not quite as hidden as he might like to think, or at least in this situation, it's really hard to hide. So,
and in this situation, we're like, Valentine can't be the poisoner, but at the same time, we're like, the message is clear.
Yeah. It's like, like the doctor is wrong, but he's right at the same time. It's like if you cut off all the context, he's right.
Exactly. But the statement is just so powerful about it. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Hey, sorry, I honestly don't know what's happening this morning. My internet keeps knocking out.
Oh,
sorry. This is just the morning for our trouble. We managed to make it 3 weeks without it or 3 times without it, and now this is time number 4, so don't worry. So, Mercedes, yes, you were right, and I was having such a hard time to not declare that you were right before.
So on the live streams was so funny because I could see Naomi just going.
Yeah. So he is so shocked, first of all, that she comes, but then when she says, Edmund, you will not kill my son, I was just like, oh yes. And then his response is so great because I don't think he didn't know that she knew.
No.
At all. And so his response was fantastic.
Yeah.
And then when he says to her, Mercedes is dead, madam. I know no one now of that name. I was just like, oh.
Ow!
I know, right? But then her response, Mercedes lives, sir, and she remembers, for she alone recognized you when she saw you. And even before she saw you, by your voice, Edmund, by the simple sound of your voice. And from that moment, she has followed your steps, watched you, feared you, and she needs not to inquire what hand has dealt the blow which now strikes Monsieur de Morcerf. Fernand, do you mean? Replied Cristo with bitter irony. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
She's like, yeah, I've been watching you the whole time. I just haven't interfered. But now, no.
And do you remember the conversation that they had earlier in the book? I'm not going to be able to find it because it's just so far, like so many things in there. But there was a conversation they had where he was like, I knew this girl in wherever, like whatever town that he said. And she's like, and he's like, and when I came back, she had married someone else. And like the whole time she's like, he's talking about me in a different town.
Oh yeah. I went back and looked at that chapter again because I thought I was like, now that you know the truth, to go back and read that conversation, it's so loaded. It's so loaded. Yeah.
Mercedes is just sitting there like, oh my goodness, seriously? It is what happened, but it also isn't. And I really wish you would just tell me who you are, but you're not going to, and I can't acknowledge it.
Yeah. I also thought it was interesting that she reveals in this chapter that she was told that he exited the prison as another prisoner, and that they threw his body into the water and they heard him scream. Like, I didn't know that she knew that, so I find that so fascinating. But by that point, she was already married, wasn't she?
Yes. Because she married 15 months or 18 months, was it, after he had been arrested and he was in prison for 14 years, wasn't it? Or was it 4 years?
Either way, it wasn't very long. It was enough time in terms of... It was
definitely while he was in prison.
Yeah, it was enough time in terms of I can see why Mercedes got married when she did, but it was well before he escaped from prison. So
right. Mm-hmm. So then she has this hope that she's alive, but she kind of thinks that he's dead. Right? I think that's the impression that I got from how she told that story, was she kind of assumed that he was dead.
Well, you would, she hears his voice. Definitely think that.
Yeah. So. And so then, and this is the kind of the first time he has like an open discussion about his revenge and his feelings about everything. And that was so fascinating too. And then he says to her, let's see, that why he is revenging Fernand. And he says, the French did not avenge themselves on the traitor. The Spaniards did not shoot the traitor. Ali in his tomb left the traitor unpunished. But I, betrayed, sacrificed, buried, have risen from my tomb by the grace of God to punish that man. He sends me for that purpose. And here I am. I thought that was such an interesting statement because, first of all, it goes back to that whole idea we were talking before about him being reborn in that moment when they throw him in the water. But that statement has a lot of savior language in it, which I find fascinating.
Mm-hmm. He definitely has a God complex.
Oh, yeah. He does. Yeah. Like, it really gives you like this view into his mind of how he views his purpose now, and he's totally convinced himself that God approves of it, and even more so that he is like, I mean, in that sentence, he was basically saying he was like Jesus, and therefore, you know, he is right. I don't know. I found that so fascinating.
Yeah, and it makes it an interesting contrast with. Oh, sorry. What'd you say?
I was just gonna say, I definitely think that he views himself as like immoral, or not immoral, but like invincible, and like he can't die now because of what he survived. So
yeah,
except that the minute. Oh, sorry, Sarah.
No, thank you. I was just gonna say he kind of almost views himself and his mission as being one. Like, it's not a situation of if I die, my mission won't be accomplished. It's my mission hasn't been accomplished, therefore I cannot die.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it very much seems like Edmond Dantes is dead to him. That part of his life is completely over. All that matters now is this mission of his.
Yeah.
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 Which says a lot about his state of mind. Like I hesitate
needs
to say
help.
he has some form of depression, but he definitely hasn't processed things properly.
No,
Like-
he needs to go talk to someone.
Yeah, he desperately needs to do some processing.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about that is then when Mercedes says, you know, you must save my son, you can't kill him, his first response is, well, then I must die.
Yeah.
So, but I think that does actually fit in with what you were saying, Sarah, because if his life is his mission and he can't kill Albert and therefore revenge himself on Fernand, he doesn't have a mission anymore. Therefore, why should he live anymore?
Yeah, and he's starting to come to the end of his mission. Like, you know, his plans are starting to come to fruition, which must be a strange feeling for him given how long it's been that he's been doing this.
I don't think he's ever anticipated or thought about what would happen after.
Mm-hmm.
All his focus has just been on this, and he hasn't even considered life afterwards. And so, but maybe that means he thinks that he's going to die or that he will kill himself once this is over, because that's all. There isn't anything else for him.
Yeah, I think it's his way of trying to avoid thinking about it. He's focusing on the revenge as a way to keep himself going, because he's so, like, his life was completely destroyed. And when he escaped, everything he loved was gone, basically. So he had to rebuild on something, but because he didn't process his emotions, he had this massive weight of grief and pain. And so he rebuilt it on that vengeance. Problem is that now we're starting to reach the point where the vengeance is going to be fulfilled, and not even counting the damage that he's causing. So what next?
Exactly.
Once that's happened. And it's been years now that he's been, I think the word is subsisting on just his vengeance, basically. Like there's a reason that that there's so much vampiric language describing him, and it's that he basically is just death. At this point, he lives to leech off of other people through his vengeance. So rather than drinking someone's blood, he is like sucking the life or joy out of their lives, metaphorically speaking. And then it's even more interesting when you contrast it. Oh, sorry.
Well, just like that's amazing.
Think about this a lot.
And then I was going to say, it's even more interesting when you contrast it with the avenging angel style language that he just used, because like everyone else sees him as this cold figure of death, where he literally seems inhuman. They don't really see him eat much. When you touch his hand, it's cold, like all these things where he seems very vampiric. But he sees himself as almost the opposite in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
But sorry, dude, you're wrong.
So that part was interesting about the not eating much, because at first I was 100% in the vampire camp of like, that's highlighting that he's like death or whatever. But then they were really talking about how he wouldn't eat at the Monsurf's house, at Mercedes' house, and that it actually comes out that he would not eat in the house of his enemy, which I thought was very fascinating.
Yes.
I thought, so that part didn't necessarily have anything to do with whether he's undead or vampiric, but that he refused to eat in the house of his enemy. Even when Mercedes was like pushing food on him in the garden in their private conversation, she was like, eat this fruit, and he wouldn't do it.
Yeah, because she gets to say the significance of him not eating. Like, she knows this is a sign of him marking us as an enemy.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Also, I mean, then in some ways, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think in some ways he views Mercedes as equal in the enemy category as Ferdinand. Like, that's why in some ways I think he wants Albert to die as opposed to just like hurting Ferdinand, because he's already hurt Ferdinand in like many ways. But Mercedes' life is her child. And so if he's going to give up on that, like, he's not going to punish one of the people that he needs to punish in his mind, which is Mercedes. So I think she's one of the 4 villains in his mind.
That's totally exactly what I was just about to say. Is it really comes out that I don't get the impression that he loves her anymore at all. Like, he had all of these statements that were in, like, when he was talking to her about their life, it was past, right? Like, his love for her, it was past. And so I agree. Like, I think that she's potentially in his villain category, in his revenge category, but he is struggling with that.
I think he's
really came out
unraveling
in
now.
this chapter, and with the duel, he is struggling with whether or not she is actually a villain, whether or not she deserves his revenge. He's really struggling with that, and we get this between this chapter with Mercedes and then moving on to the duel. We start to see that maybe his heart isn't completely stone. It's starting to look like it's opening up, possibly for there's still human feeling in there. It's not a lot yet, but that inkling came up in those few chapters that maybe his heart is not 100% stone. But I don't think that means that he is going to fall in love with Mercedes again.
Yeah, there's
I
a
think
difference
he's
between
gone.
forgiveness and romantic love.
Yes.
Yeah. And with Mercedes,
I feel like, sorry, I was just because I feel like what you were saying, Janelle, about like him, like, you know, ending that part of his life as Edmond Dantes, like that's dead to him in that part. I feel like that also is tied to the Mercedes. Like, Mercedes and Edmond were a thing, and now that he's no longer Edmond, that's not part of his life anymore. Like, she's just on his hit list, and like he just wants to get revenge on those people, and then who knows what his next plan is. He doesn't even probably know himself, but that's Mercedes isn't a part of that, because he's not Edmond Dantes anymore. He's not that young, naive sailor who was like all happy-go-lucky. That's just not him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that additionally, like on top of that, like, yes, very much, I think he isn't in love with her anymore. But additionally, I think that he hasn't coped with the pain of finding out that she moved on and married his enemy. And so the only way he knows how to deal with that is to relegate her is to vilify her, to relegate her into the same category as the other people that betrayed him. In their case, they actually did. In her case, it wasn't betrayal. It was just trying to live her life.
Right.
So he doesn't know what to do with all these feelings. So he's just like, well, I'm going to do the same thing I'm doing with everyone else.
Right. Rather than dealing with any of his feelings, he just nurses revenge.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think he realizes yet that by nursing revenge, he is, you know, how do I say this? Like, it's the worst for him, right? That he's not dealing with those feelings, that he is instead just nursing revenge. Is in the end, the person he hurts the most is himself.
Yeah, it's basically like the initial act of him being betrayed was a physical wound in a metaphorical sense. And rather than treating it, he just kind of closed it off and is constantly trying to hold on to it like, this is mine, this is mine. No one else acknowledges that it's here, but it is here. If I acknowledge it, therefore it's mine. But he's not cleaning it or taking care of it. So it's just rotting from the inside out.
Yeah.
Just slowly taking over him.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's so many things about this. And the villain, Catarus. He came back. I really liked that he was like back in it. And I was like, this guy, you think he's all like, the beginning, you think he's all innocent and just happened to have drunk too much. And then they get like, you're slowly realizing, actually, no, he's not that great. And then he keeps coming back and you're like, he's actually on par maybe with the others. He just didn't show it at the beginning.
He got worse and worse the more we got to know him in the story. Honestly, I was like, because I was the same, Naomi. I was like, oh, this guy's just kind of a drunken idiot. But the more I was like, no, oh my goodness, he's awful. He was so awful. And he was constantly blackmailing that guy, Andrea. Like, yeah. And then the minute he finds out the Count's not going to be in the house, all he's thinking of, he's like, oh my goodness, I'm totally going to rob it.
Like, really,
and he goes in, and then he's like, oh my goodness, it's the Abbe. So you recognize him, and you're sorry.
Yeah, like, okay.
You hate to go down the window where your partner in crime is out there gonna do who knows what to you and kill you.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a part that needs to get wrapped up, right? Because Caderousse now has been killed, and we know who did it. But are they ever gonna make the connection? Because the Abbe sent them on the road of this. What was that guy's? What's his real name? Bertruccio or something?
Yeah, something like that.
He sent him
All
on
these
that
names.
guy.
There's so many names and so many hidden identities. It's really hard.
I know. I was thinking I almost should make a list because the Count himself has so many names, and then everybody else has multiple names. But yeah, so he sends them on the hunt for that guy, the convict, guy. But who is gonna make the connection that guy is Andrea or whatever, however you say that guy's name? That part I'm very curious about.
So I don't remember this. Sarah might, but I don't remember this. I think that there's going to be something where it's like a big reveal, and it's going to come out and be like a big mark on Madame Danglars, so like the Danglars family and the Villefort family, because it's going to be a shame to their entire reputation that this is their child.
Right. Yeah.
So that's what I think.
I hope that's what happens. That would be great.
Sarah can't say a word because I don't remember.
She's like, don't talk. But
I think like that would just be something that would just be so true to like, I don't know. The Count's like, okay, I'm going to destroy, not only am I going to destroy their finances, destroy their familiar relationships, I'm also going to destroy their status in society.
Because that's what's important to them. Both Danglars and Villefort, their status, their reputation is really important to them.
Mm-hmm.
And to be tied to a criminal who then is masquerading as like a potential engagement partner to his half-sister, who neither of them know that. No one knows it, but still, that will come out in society as a massive bomb.
Yeah. Monte Cristo is good at seeing what people value. And by the way, this is not a comment on what's going to happen. He's good at seeing what people value and targeting that. Because for him, just killing them would not be vengeance. Because that's not what he suffered. He suffered something a lot more drawn out. So
that's right. He had everything taken away from him. So for his vengeance, his revenge, he's going to take everything away from the people who did it to him. Or else it's not vengeance.
Yeah.
In his mind,
and
right?
I can't remember. Do you guys remember? I couldn't find it in here quickly, but like who he was talking to, which basically he was like explaining the logic of like the Abbe was to him. It was kind of a strange reversal. I couldn't find it right now because I have a lot of orange tabs because he goes through a lot of emotional growth right now or a lot of emotional stress. Maybe it's the way to say it.
I can't think of the part that you're thinking of. I don't know.
Because there was one section where he was talking to someone who was, I don't know, listening. Maybe it was Villefort in the beginning. I'm going to keep looking for it. I'll find it maybe eventually. But he was basically saying, if this is what happened, then this is what happened. And it was like he basically became the Abbe in prison talking to his younger self in this part of the book, I think.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to have to try finding it. Anyways.
Okay.
The Count
anything else to talk about? Well, let's see.
Let's go back
Penny
to the
said that she
beginning for a
finished it.
Oh.
Great job, Penny. Yeah, the middle parts, if you're not reading it all the way together, then it can be a little, but I like that we're almost there. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, and like the book is fast paced throughout the whole thing, and now
Penny remembers it too, but I can't remember where it was or who it was with. That's my problem. I can't remember who it was. So I have to figure that out. If it was a bad guy or a good guy, because I have pink is good and blue is bad in my section, so it's really hard.
Since we're talking about that, let's go back to the beginning of this section where Villefort is making his inquiries into the Count of Monte Cristo. First of all, we get another name for the Count. How does he keep track of all of his aliases? Seriously. Like now we've got
spreadsheet somewhere in a physical form.
Unbelievable. But then I thought, okay, this was so genius when he knows that Villefort is doing these inquiries. And so he works it so that Villefort talks to him as he is the Abbe Bosconi or whatever his name is. But Villefort's talking to him. And I was like, the Count, like he's just so devious and cunning. Like, that he set that up so that he could tell Villefort whatever he wanted about the Count.
And Villefort's also in disguise. He's the valet. Like, they're both in disguise in this conversation.
Exactly. It was actually really funny.
It's like, Villefort, I know you think you're good, but you're not. Like, you are not that good at this. You're talking to an actual master right now.
I love the timeline of it, and I just love this whole thing. So, like, the first time when he, like, describes the Abbe, I just loved it, where it was like, the Abbe replaced the large spectacles, which not only covered his eyes, but his temple, and sitting down, motioned his sister to do the same. His glasses are that big. Who needs glasses that big? I think that'd be a red flag. I'd be like, you don't need glasses up here.
That's like wearing those, glasses with the nose and the mustache, like the disguise.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Where people are like, this is obviously a disguise.
Yeah.
like, what do you mean? I'm not this.
That's so
And then
funny.
when he opens the light or opens the blind, and it looks only on Villefort and not him, like an interrogation light.
Yeah. Oh
Monte
my
Cristo's
goodness.
just flexing on him the whole time.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
So then continuing that part, I thought it was so interesting. We got more kind of look into the inner life a little bit of Villefort and how he views things. And I thought it was so interesting. Now, this is in the next chapter, Madame de Saint-Méran. But we learn that Villefort has his own enemy list that he is keeping track of. So it's not just the Count who has this list and we know what he's doing with it, but with Villefort, he's got a list and we don't know what he plans to do with it. But it was so interesting. It said, instead of plunging into the massive documents piled before him, he opened the drawer of his desk, touched a spring, and drew out a parcel of cherished memoranda, amongst which he had carefully arranged in characters only known to himself the names of all those who, either in his political career, in money matters, at the bar, or in his mysterious love affairs, had become his enemy. Their number was formidable now that he had begun to fear, and yet these names, powerful though they were, had often caused him to smile with the same kind of satisfaction experienced by a traveler who from the summit of a mountain beholds at his feet the craggy eminences, the almost impassable paths, and the fearful chasms through which he has so perilously climbed. When he had run over all those names in his memory, again read and studied them, commenting meanwhile upon his lists, he shook his head. No, he murmured, none of my enemies would have waited so patiently and laboriously for so long a space of time that they might now come and crush me with the secret. Sometimes, as Hamlet says, foul deeds will rise, though all the earth o'erwhelm them to men's eyes. But like a phosphoric light, they rise but to mislead. So I just thought that was so fascinating because I bet that on that list of his enemies, Edmond Dantes is not on that list.
Probably not.
Because
I think
Villefort
too.
believes he's dead.
Yeah, he wouldn't think of him on as something that, or as someone who would be a reasonable threat, because to him it wasn't personal. The guy had no power of any kind. And the way he sees it probably is, even if Edmond did escape, what could he do? Like, he has no influence of any kind.
Yeah.
Problem is that doesn't take his sort of cellmate into account. So,
yes.
I thought it was interesting because it's like, yeah, he doesn't consider Edmond Dantes that much of a concern. And he probably just was like a moment and he forgot about it entirely.
Oh, I'm sure of it.
Like, he doesn't probably even remember this guy.
No.
To this time, I would bet. Because he has no need to know of a one random guy who he sent to Chateauneuf, unless he was prompted in the whole, like, remember when your father almost got you in trouble? Like, that would have been the only thing that would have triggered this situation.
Which makes me wonder how many other people he's done this kind of thing to. Like,
which wouldn't surprise me because, he's got this huge list of enemies. And actually, the way he talked about that list lets you know so much about his character, because he talks about how he makes enemies in his political career, in money matters, at the bar, or in his mysterious love affairs. So we already know that he has one with Madame Danglars, but that means that he's had multiple. Like, he does not treat people very well, is what you get from that list.
Well, and I already read Sarah the quote too, like when your internet was glitching, but it was in chapter 81 where the doctor is like, you need to act with integrity essentially. And he says, show yourself as a man, as an interpreter of the law, do your honor to your profession by sacrificing your selfish interests to it. And it's like, yes, he's accusing Villefort's daughter, but he's really blatantly lying out what's the problem with Villefort.
Oh, for sure.
The doctor's the only one who's like saying this is actually what's wrong. And you need to actually own up to the fact that your job is supposed to be a job of respect and duty and like not doing what you want to do for your psyche. Like,
yeah. Well, and the worst part I think about all of that is that Villefort wasn't actually all that worried about his daughter. He was most worried about his reputation if this came out.
Yeah.
I think he also was like, my daughter couldn't have done this, but he also was like, yeah, there's no way. Like, I don't want to get this this is not on my hands.
Yeah. Well, it's exactly what he did with Edmond, where it's like, my father did this, but if it gets out, then it could ruin me. So I'm going to send this completely innocent kid, basically, to prison.
Yeah.
For no reason other than how it could impact me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
All the things that happen in this section. Because, like,
have we
serial killing?
What's that?
I was going to say with the serial killing, like,
yeah,
you know?
That's what I was going to say. We need to talk about who's killing off all of Valentine's grandparents. Okay.
Sarah and I will shut our mouths. Now you can say your theory.
Okay. So that was so interesting that both Monsieur and Madame de Saint-Méran died. I wasn't actually suspicious when the man died, but obviously when his wife died, I was like, what is happening here? And then they mentioned that she was poisoned, and I was like, huh. So who is poisoning these people? And then it reminded me of that conversation that the Count had with was it Mrs. Villefort or Madame Danglars about poisoning?
Madame Villefort.
Yes. So you're just like, is she poisoning everybody? And she was acting so suspiciously. Like, why did the doctor meet her going to the kitchen? Why was she going to the kitchen? I think it was to get rid of evidence, right? And then she was so slow in getting help, right? Because, yeah, I honestly, my suspicion that it's Mrs. Villefort, and she's doing it all for her son, that she wants her son to get the money, I think.
We can talk about it next week.
Okay.
The Valentine plot is my favorite, so I actually remember it fairly well. So,
all right.
We can talk about it next time. I've been tabbing everything relating to the poisoning for the whole book.
Yeah, it was pretty funny watching her run out of tabs.
There's so much blue, so much blue.
Awesome.
And
now
it's not just 4 men.
No. Okay, right. I need to go back and look at who else has died. Yeah. I may have missed some of it.
It's very interesting, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was great when it all started coming together. It really does feel like that, doesn't it? Like it's starting to come together slowly. It's still a little blurry with all the pieces, but it's coming together, and it's going to be all revealed. And
that's why I don't think we have hit the climax yet. It's still rising. Like there's so much tension, the rising action. And I'm just like, what is it going to be? What is going to happen at the climax? I'm so excited.
Yeah. It's like Dumas is simultaneously slowing the action and speeding it up.
Yes.
He's building tension.
Definitely.
Yeah, this is great. Madame de Villefort reminds me of Lady Macbeth. She's a terrible hostess who doesn't enjoy her guests.
That's good.
It's so good. So good. I also noticed tons of Shakespeare comments in this section. Like there were several remarks to Shakespeare. Yep. I can't remember them all, but there were like multiple in this one section alone.
Yeah.
I was like, that's, I don't know, randomly strange because that hasn't been a thing before in this book. I feel like I would have noticed that. But maybe now that everything's starting to come to fruition, like the whole like Hamlet and the whole tragedies are starting to come together.
Well, there is something very Shakespearean about this book. Like it's much more complex. longer, but like
Maybe
even
Dumas just had Shakespeare on the brain because he was writing a very Shakespearean plot, definitely.
well, and like the Count kind of
definitely
reminds me
feels
of like, oh, sorry, Naomi, what'd you say?
I just said definitely feels that way, like a Shakespeare, but in like a full length novel.
Yeah.
Or maybe like 3 full length novels.
Yeah. Yeah, like the Count is kind of he has some Macbeth in him, but I think he's not a ton of Macbeth, except in maybe a little bit in the later half. But he does have a lot of Hamlet, a fair amount of Prospero from The Tempest, I would think, with the puppeteer tendencies, that kind of thing, and the search for vengeance.
I'm not familiar with The Tempest, so I can't comment.
It's one of my favorites. So
yes, I can understand that.
Yeah, Prospero, short version is he's a magician who shipwrecks everyone who ever betrayed him on an island with him after he's been stranded there for 12 years, and then starts to puppeteer a vengeance plan. So
he doesn't like it when people don't do what he wants, and so then he takes revenge in different ways with magic.
yeah, well, yes, but it also there was like legitimate treason against him.
There's levels otherwise too. That's pure Shakespeare. Pure Shakespeare. But yes, it's very interesting how it's starting to feel that way. I don't know. Shakespearean in this drama and revenge aspect.
Yeah.
So there's one other thing I made a note of. I don't want to forget to mention. So in this whole part with Albert, when it first comes out in the newspaper about his dad, although it's never clearly said, he is just instantly like, I'm going to kill whoever did this. Like, he's all about maintaining his dad's reputation. It's interesting to me that it never even crossed his mind that it might be true, or it seems like it doesn't matter, because as he continues on and he learns that it is true, he still wants to fight everybody else, but he never talks to his father, which I thought was so fascinating. Now, I know that after the trial, his dad disappeared somewhere, and so we don't know. But I just find it so fascinating that in all of that, we never get a scene where he talks to his father. Yeah. So what is that about? Like, he's so willing to call out everybody else, but he doesn't seem to think maybe it's important that my dad really did this and we should talk about that.
It's kind of like, to me, that, like, so with at least that family, they've been slowly torn apart by Monte Cristo's plan, right? Like, there were the things like back in Rome where he intentionally thought, like, even when he wasn't eating in Rome with them, you can tell that he was already like, this kid is my enemy. We're like, that's a bit extreme for this kid. I don't know. That was my thought. But when he did that, like, he has this plan back from then where he's trying to slowly but surely tear this family apart. And so to have like Albert, like, always, be like, oh, my father's this way, but they might not seem close. I think you still have that innate trust in your parents. Like, you will always like, you'll be like, no, like my parents would never do that. And part of this is also coming from me watching too much of the show called Evil Lives Here, which is about families where they like have like a serial killer living in their house, or like a serial criminal. And they basically are like, some of them, like, the kids are like, my parent would never do that. And it's like, actually, he was like a killer who killed like 15 people or something. And they just were like, no, never. Even though they're like, they talk about all their childhood and how there were like all these things that you could see if you noticed. So I feel like we have an innate desire to trust our parents because that's how like we've been raised. And then to be like, even if I'm not close with them or whatever else, like, we still think like they're not capable of that. And then for him to hear the story from Hidi, who was like, this is what happened. This is how it was like treated of me. And like, I was completely and utterly betrayed by my mother, like sold into slavery. So he knows the whole gory backstory. And then to be like, by the way, your dad did that. He's like, I don't think he can even compute it. I think he's just like been like, no, I can't even, because I know that story and I can't put that name with that story.
Right.
Yeah. And just adding to that a little bit. So I know that a lot of times when, and just to clarify, I'm not saying that Fernand was ever abusive to Albert. I don't think he was, but he was probably emotionally negligent. And I think Albert was so desperate for any kind of emotional connection or approval from his father that he literally can't even comprehend. Like he can't allow himself to comprehend that his father may have done something this horrific, especially like even for young children. And just to clarify, I am very much an amateur in the topic I'm about to discuss. So please don't take my word as like,
Go for it.
know, yeah. But when children deal with situations where they have either distant parents or negligent parents, or in some cases much more direct forms of mistreatment, one of the ways of dealing with it is to, I guess, not idolize the parent, but to kind of say everything is my fault, the parent is perfect. Not consciously, but this is kind of a method of coping with it. And I think part of it is because the parent has so much power over you, and also you want to love your parents. So one of the methods of dealing with this is to say, well, someone has to be wrong, and it's not them, therefore it must be me. So Albert is just trying to deflect the I guess blame onto someone, because it cannot possibly be my father.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
like he's an adult.
And I do think it's interesting that we don't have that
right.
confrontation, Janelle. Like I do think it's interesting we don't have that confrontation like that. But it's like I do also see where he's like, no, not my dad, not ever, because you just have that gut reaction, I think. And then he has to be shown like the physical proof. Like he was willing to kill his friend over it.
He immediately goes to blaming the Count
Mm-hmm.
rather than like, and I realize it's all emotional at that point. He's reacting emotionally. So maybe once he has a chance to think about it and whatever, but yeah, like he immediately thinks, oh, it's all the Count's fault. Mm-hmm. So we better have a duel.
Have either of you watched Les Mis before, or like
which version?
Any of it versions experienced it?
Yeah.
Okay, so he reminded me very much of Marius when we first read it, and I was like, oh no, here's gonna, like, I couldn't remember for exact, but I was like, here's gonna be another Marius-like character who's just like, I enjoyed Marius, but I was like, he's just dopey in love and he doesn't really think things through and like that kind of thing. And I was like, he turned into be something like, actually like fun and like actually thoughtful, but like, I don't know, logical and strategic in some ways, if that's kind of how I can attribute those things to him. But I think this is where the Marius side that I saw at the beginning is coming out, where in that moment of attack, almost, he feels like, for his family, he just goes with that emotional Marius side that I saw at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So and it just makes it so interesting because he is very emotional. He is very, very emotional, and has quite the temper. So that I actually find it fascinating that he turned, it seems almost so easily, when he forgives the Count at the duel. Now, we know, obviously, he had a conversation with his mother and learned about what his dad did to the Count. But for being so emotional, that seems like a pretty quick change for him, because up until that point, he was all, nope. I'm just going to react emotionally regardless of the truth. Whereas now all of a sudden it was like, oh, that's the truth. Okay, I'm going to forgive him. Like, it seems like an abrupt change for him.
Yeah, my take on this would be that Albert is very much the son of his parents. Like, him automatically jumping to a duel reminds me of at the beginning of the book when Fernand is like, well, I want to marry Mercedes, so I'm going to kill Edmond. And Mercedes is like, you kill him, I'm going to kill myself.
Right.
Like,
they're dramatic.
They're like, death.
That's true. They are actually, his parents are both quite dramatic and kind of make like spontaneous or, not well thought out decisions.
Yeah, and I like what Jan's saying too. Yeah,
right.
Where Jan's saying like his mother's a huge influence in his life, and I think as we have clearly seen, like they're the tie. Like he's happy to spend weeks on end with her and like go on vacations with her, and that's I think not something that's normal for like that age group and like what we're seeing in this book. And so I think when she's like, no, listen to what's happened. I will tell you what happened to me and to your father and to the Count, because we've all had this history. I think he's willing to actually sit down and listen to his mom because she's his mom. If it was like his best friend, I don't think he'd listen as well. If it was the Count, I don't think he'd listen as well. His father, probably not, probably some, but not as well. But because it's his mother, who he literally has a portrait of in his house, like in his little guest house area, I think he's willing to listen to her and totally take what she says and calm down because of it.
Yeah.
I think they're like, I would call her his best friend from what we've seen in this book.
Yeah.
Like, yes, he has male friends, but I think she's probably his best friend.
And the one who has the most influence with him, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's so interesting now that Albert knows who the Count really is. Now it's starting to come out. Like in this section, it's revealed that more people than the Count realized knows who he is, because he didn't know Mercedes knew, right? So now it's starting to come out, and I don't know, I'm thinking that that's totally going to play into the climax, that it's going to start coming out who he is.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the Count's allure, is that he's mysterious, that nobody knows his origin, that nobody knows what he's thinking, and suddenly people know him and know his origin and know how to get at him. And I think this is where he's starting to unravel. Like, I think we saw that with Mercedes being like, no, don't kill him. And then he's like, fine, I'll kill myself. And we're like, well, that's dramatic.
That's not what I meant.
But I think that's the start of the unraveling for him, is when he's just like, I thought I had this all under control, and I don't. Yes. I think he was like a puppeteer in his mind, and people still have thinking brains and emotions and feelings without his controlling them. He didn't realize it.
Yes, I think it's totally going to start to get out of his control. And then his reaction to that is going to be very interesting, because he has been so used to being in control and to have his plan play out. And so once it starts to play out without it being his plan, it's going to be very interesting. And I'm very interested to see how he reacts to that.
Mm-hmm. He's always been in the control seat. So now for him to be kind of a side observer of certain things is going to be interesting, because he has never been in that position for us.
Well, and I think there would also be a certain amount of fear, because the last time he didn't have basically complete control of his environment, he was betrayed and sent to prison for, however many years. So for him, it's one extreme or the other. He hasn't gotten past that moment of initial pain. So it's like, I must control everything. Like with general anxiety disorder, which I do have, there's an instinct to want to control everything around you. So like sound, like noise canceling headphones help with me sometimes, because it shuts out all the other sound. Or sometimes walking around, even outside, if it's really extreme, walking in grass can be difficult, because it feels like there's bugs scratching against your legs, stuff like that. So being inside is easier, because you can control your environment depending on the person, depending on how you're feeling, all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying that the Count has anxiety, but that instinct, that situation where you're suddenly, oh, sorry, what did you say?
I said probably a bit.
Probably paranoia, if nothing else. But like, he no longer has that control. So he's kind of freaking out a little bit and jumping to the opposite extreme. And that moment of, I'm going to have this duel. Well, I can't back down. So if Albert doesn't back down, then I have to die or kill him. And if I can't kill him, then I'm going to die. And with Albert, he's got these two opposing forces of must defend the family, because honor is a big priority to him, and the appearance of his family. And so when his mother, who is kind of the opposing force to his father, cuts in and says, no, that's not what's going on. It's this way, and this is what I think you should do, blah, blah, blah. She kind of cancels out that force and allows him to kind of take a different path.
Yeah. It was interesting to see how the Count was still trying to control the events of the duel, right? Because he makes this will. And even in that, he's controlling who Haiti marries, who Morel marries. He's still trying to control the story. And then in the duel, he's trying to control even how he dies. He knows he should die in this duel, but he even wants to control that, so that his reputation afterwards is what he wants it to be, right? Like, so he doesn't want, in the duel, it sounds like he didn't want Albert to kill him. It was almost like he wanted people to know that he was the one who was willing to die. That, do you know what I mean? So even then, he was still so desperately trying to control all of these events. And then Albert shows up and says, no, I forgive you. And that's where we ended in this section. So now, like, how is the Count going to react to that? Because that was not his plan.
Yeah, it's
like,
kind of
he's unraveling. He's losing control.
Yeah. I think something else about the Count is that he sees it all black and white. Like, there's good guys and bad guys. Like, there's no in between guys. There's there's right and wrong. There's all these different, like, polarizing sides. There's no balance. And I think for him to have that moment where he's like, oh, Mercedes is a bad guy, I don't like her, she betrayed me, and suddenly to be like, actually, she was in a pretty hard spot and she thought you were, like, gone forever, and then, like, be like, oh, now suddenly she's in the gray area. He doesn't know what to do with that. Exactly. And then to have, like, the Albert situation, and he's like, what? And then to be like, oh, well, I have to provide for Haiti. So then he's, like, trying to get her a husband. And then he finds out that Morel's in love with Valentine, who's the daughter of his enemy. And he's like, wait, there's a hole in the gray area there.
What am I supposed to do with this?
I don't think he knows about Valentine yet. He knows Morel is in love with a girl, but Morel didn't say who it was.
Okay, well, we know that, but not him.
Yeah.
So then, like, so he knows that Morel's in love. So then that throws a whole other section there where he can't control that. And he's like, this whole gray area of these children and these people and these things that he can't control. I think these black and white areas, suddenly he's realizing life is not black and white, and he doesn't know how to react because he's always lived in this, you're bad or you're good, or this is the right thing to do or this is the wrong thing to do. But yet he's the one who floats back and forth between those things and is the perfect grayscale. So he doesn't let anyone else live there, but he lives there. So I think it's just going to be interesting to see how he's, like, reacting to a world that's no longer just black and white.
Yeah. Yeah. And that way he hasn't moved on from being a kid who, essentially, I say kid, but he really wasn't that young, but, a young man being shoved into prison for something he didn't do. He hasn't moved on from that. He still is kind of frozen at that age in terms of his moral views.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah, because he was 19 when he went to prison?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
I think it was 19.
I'm pretty sure it was 19, yeah.
And that's really young. Even back in the 1800s, that's still quite young.
Yeah, he basically had his life stolen. And he was in prison for, like, I'm pretty sure it was 13 years.
13 or 14, yeah.
Yeah, so that's edging up on half of his life, but by the time he escaped.
Yeah. And then to have that whole mentality set when he leaves is just, no one's been there to correct him because he doesn't answer to a higher, he doesn't answer to a higher up. He doesn't answer to a boss. He doesn't answer to someone who's giving him the money because he owns all the money that he's been, willed essentially by the Abbé. Like, and he thinks of himself as God now. So he doesn't answer to God. He is God in his mind. So there's no one to correct him or to tell him who's right and wrong.
And that would have been the guy in jail, the Abbé in jail. It's really unfortunate, actually, that he died so soon because he could have been the guy to bring, I think, Dante's out of this and to have a more balanced worldview.
Yeah,
exactly.
Do you guys remember how many years it was before he met the Abbé in prison?
I think it was like 3 or 4.
Yeah. Okay, so he basically spent 3 or 4 years in complete total isolation, just himself, his mind, and his grief. And we know from the descriptions of his voice when he escaped that there was a lot of screaming. So he was basically just being mentally tortured by himself and his pain for that long. Can you imagine what that does to your mind?
Yeah.
So the Abbé was kind of his saving grace. He probably would have been completely insane if, by the time he reached, even if he had managed to escape at the 13-year mark, I don't think he would have been mentally stable when he did, because isolation does things to you. It messes with you in ways that are really, really frightening.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, and he had his revenge plan was so set in his mind even before he met the Abe, because in their conversations, even then the Abe was trying to moderate him a little bit, you know, but it wasn't enough. It was too late, or he didn't have enough time because then he died. But
Yeah.
Well, even their first conversation where they're like, let's escape. And he's like, great, I'll kill the guard. And I was like, no, we don't need to kill him. Like, the first reaction was that black and white mentality where it's like, we're the good guys, we're trying to escape, so we'll kill the bad guy who's locking us in. It was like needed tempering, and no one ever was able to temper it quite well because they didn't have that time to break through what had already been developed.
Yeah.
He kind of reminds me a bit of the Phantom of the Opera, actually, in this, in that in that it's like he sees everything in very black and white terms, but it's almost deliberate, not willful, but it's like I have to see things this way because seeing things in gray is too painful. Because if things are in gray, then that means that I can't handle it, because like in the case of the Phantom, everything has to be either doing what he wants or it's wrong.
Yeah.
Up to and including hurting the people he cares about. In the case of the Count, he's not quite as, like, he doesn't really acknowledge that he's hurting people he cares about or even realize it, but it is very much like what I want is right, what I don't want is wrong. Also, they're both disguise experts.
Yeah, that's true.
Honestly, the Count with his disguises at the end of that first chapter, I was dying hysterically when it was like looking at that timeline. I was telling Sarah, like, this was hysterical because that first chapter, right, where he's meeting with Villefort, he has the meeting as the Abbe. Less than an hour later, he's at a different address in a completely different getup with an open wound and like a fake jaw and all of these things. And Villefort has no clue that he's talking to the same person. I'm like, how do you do that in that much time? Like,
cracks me up. It's very funny. And also a little bit Shakespearean there too, right? Like that suspension of disbelief where you're like, can they actually disguise themselves so well that people don't recognize them?
That's why the glasses just made me laugh. I'm like, that would have been a big sign. I'm like, you do not have eyes up here. You do not need big glasses like that.
Yeah, Naomi was laughing about it so much on our camping trip. It was really funny.
Yeah, but I also think it's interesting the coincidences of Hedy being the one person who can talk about Fernand being the guy who's like the villain who turned on everyone. Like she's the one, and yet she happens to be in Monte Cristo's house.
Yeah,
like
and that's
full of coincidences.
The one part of his plan, like so much else of his plan was so conceived and planned out, and he went out and made these acquaintances to get his plan together. But Hedy doesn't know when he bought her the connections.
Yeah,
right.
She seems okay with it, but
like, did he know that that was the connection? I'm like, I still don't know how much he planned.
It's a good question.
He can't have known her background when he bought her.
No, because he asked her and she's like, fine, I'll tell you my story.
Right. So that's definitely one that falls in the coincidence side, whereas so much else that like he did on purpose. He planned things out. He made acquaintances and connections. But Hedy is that in, and that was a big one, but he had there was no way he could have planned for that. It fell in his lap and then he was like, perfect.
Yeah, he must have been like, wow, jackpot.
Which probably didn't help with his God complex. Just saying.
Yeah, I do.
No, not at all.
I normally don't like books with like tons of coincidences, but I think that this one is what I'm totally willing to forgive because, first of all, the Count seems like he's overly planning everything, so it always makes sense. But then also the other coincidences, I'm like, whatever. I'm happy to overlook them because I'm just happy. It just makes it interesting. It makes it so much more interesting and also makes it so much more in depth. When the Count does anything, you're like, what's that mean? Like, where did that come from? Or like, how does that relationship work? Like, how did he know which guy to get as his like steward who happened to be the adoptive father of the child of Villefort and Madame Danglars? Like, how did he happen to get that guy? Like,
yeah, that's another one that has to fall in the coincidence camp too.
But I mean, like, he was the abbot who talked to him in prison. But I'm like, but how do you know that that's the guy who did that? I'm okay with all the coincidences because it's just fun.
Yeah.
It is.
Well,
It is such a great book. I am so glad that I decided to read it this summer because it is amazing.
Yeah, it's great. So does anyone have anything else? I know we only have a couple of viewers today. That's okay. Do you have anything else you'd like us to talk about before we move on? Because, yeah, we've already been out for just over an hour now, which is
I got to go
great.
have some lunch.
Yes, it is
Can I
time
just
for
make
that.
one more comment?
Mhm.
Yes.
Thanks. I was just going to say the coincidences, they almost work because they make a nice contrast with his weird need to control everything. Because it's kind of like, yes, they're coincidences, but it kind of almost is nice to be like, see, you don't actually have control over literally everything.
Yeah, that's true.
It's true. And one coincidence that doesn't work out is Morel and Valentine so far. So I'm interested to see how that exactly plays out with his emotions. Thank you. We are all really enjoying the book. I'm so glad that we read it this summer. And we have to figure out if we're wanting to read another book next summer. Because if this is a tradition, I'm all for it. Like last year was Small Mess. This year's The Count. I'm happy with it. So
the question you have to come up with, Naomi, is whether or not they're always going to be French classics.
That was my thought. I was like, should we stick with French classics or should we stick something else? Because I don't know any other different French classic authors who would write a big book like this. Unless we were to go back to Dumas again. So anyways, we'll have to figure that out. But does anyone have any predictions who hasn't finished the book? So Sarah and I are excluded. So Janelle, do you have any predictions that you want to expect for the end or anything you're looking forward to?
I am just looking forward to all of it. I honestly, by this point, I don't know. I honestly don't know what's going to happen because, I mean, I could start to think like what his plans were for all of his enemies, but now it's starting to unravel. And so now I'm really not sure where it's going to go. There's things that need to wrap up, right? Like we need to find out who's poisoning everybody. We need to find out if Morel and Valentine are going to end up together. We need to find out where's Fernand and what's going to happen with that story. But how it all comes together, I can't see that yet. And I'm totally okay with that. I am just in it for the ride because it's been so good.
There's so many open-ended questions at this point. So they need to all get resolved. But at the same time, it's like we have 200 pages left. So there's just time to do it. But it definitely feels like the tension's ramping up because of everything that's going on. So
yeah,
it's gonna be
and
good.
Ultimately, the one thing that I really wanted for the end of this story was a redemption arc for the Count. And for the longest time, I couldn't see it happening, and that was making me sad. But in this section, we got that little glimpse that maybe his heart is not 100% of stone. So I'm starting to have hope again for the end of this story, but I'm starting to be worried, actually, that it's going to end with his death. That's what I'm worried about because I don't want it to. I want him to have life beyond revenge, but I'm a little bit worried that he might not get that.
Yeah, we don't want this to be Hamlet.
Yes, no Hamlet, please. So Jana's not sure what to expect either. I think that's the thing about this. There's so many plots going on that you can't predict the ending. But I'm really excited to revisit all the ending and go back to all the characters again and how it ends up for them in different ways. I'm really excited to reread certain scenes that Sarah knows exactly, I'm sure, what I'm talking about. And I'm really happy that there are a lot of things that will be going on. So reading between the seams, it says, I hope Dante keeps revealing himself at moments at each one's downfall, as he did with Catarus. Yes.
That was so cool.
That was awesome. I completely forgot about that, but yeah, that was great.
So yeah, I hope that that will be something that like is not just like a bad thing, like or not like a haha I beat you kind of moment, because like that would be, I think, bad for his overall like redemption arc, like you were saying, Janelle. But I do think that is something that's interesting of note. So He doesn't
I'm
tell anyone
hoping
until
that
the end.
that's what we're driving towards, right? Like, I think
Yeah.
that would be great to have a big reveal scene with the Donglers and the Villeforts, but I can't picture yet in my mind how that would look. So, but yeah, I think that would be phenomenal.
Well, I'm sure we will all be very excited for every page as it goes on. So I'm excited. I can't believe we're almost done already, though. Like, that's kind of surprising to me. It feels like we just started it. So I'm very happy that we are, almost there, but sad in a way too. So we'll have to figure out another book for next year, though, because I think this is a really fun thing to do. So
well, I'll start
lots of
researching French classics.
Yes. See if you want to change it up to a different kind of classic writer or stick with the French ones. We'll see. But anyways, so this time, normally I would end off being like, we're going to end off here, but we're just going to finish the book. So let's just finish the book and we will have fun with that.
Woohoo.
So, thanks for having me, guys. This was fun.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Sarah. You brought some great stuff to the discussion. That was good.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will see you all in 2 weeks then for the final discussion, which is crazy to say already, but
it's weird.
It's that time already. So thank you so much for joining us.
Mm-hmm.
Bye.
Bye.